My name is Fiona Calder. I am 37 years old, and I serve as a commissioned officer in the United States Navy, specializing in intelligence and linguistic operations. For over a decade, I have translated delicate negotiations, intercepted coded messages, and more times than I can count, prevented a crisis before it even began. I am fluent in French at a level most native speakers envy. Yet to my father, none of this has ever been enough. The Paris summit was one of the most prestigious diplomatic gatherings of the year. Heads of state, top military brass, and influential corporate leaders filled the grand conference hall. The air was a careful blend of expensive cologne and the sterile tang of polished steel from the sound equipment. French, English, Arabic, and a dozen other languages mingled in the air like overlapping symphonies. I was on duty, wearing the tailored navy blue uniform that marked me as an official translator for the U.S. delegation. I had been trained to walk with a calm stride, to carry myself in a way that drew no unnecessary attention. But as I stepped into the main reception area, my eyes caught a familiar figure, my father, surrounded by a group of French businessmen. Holding a crystal glass as though it were part of his hand, I slowed my pace. I knew that look in his eyes, the slight tilt of his chin when he was about to deliver a line meant to cut without leaving a visible wound. "She's just a translator," he said, with that deliberate chuckle that was equal parts pride and dismissal. The Frenchmen laughed politely, their eyes darting between us, unsure if they should join the mockery or stay neutral. The words landed exactly where he meant them to. I had heard them in different forms since I was 22, fresh out of training. Each time, they made me question whether the years of sacrifice, missed holidays, relationships that could not survive deployments, were worth it. But I did not stop walking. I adjusted the earpiece in my ear, feeling the cool metal of the microphone brush my cheek. My father barely looked at me as I passed. He kept talking, spinning stories of his latest business ventures, as if my presence required no acknowledgement beyond that one line. In the past, I might have felt my chest tighten with resentment. Now, I simply took a slow breath. In my world, control over your breath meant control over your mind. And I had long ago learned that the right moment to speak is often the one you wait for. It was during a routine translation relay that I heard it. A voice slipped through the private security channel in my earpiece. Male, speaking French, low and deliberate. Fenêtre gauche, 2 minutes. Left window, 2 minutes. The temperature in my body dropped, but my breathing stayed steady. My training clicked into place. I scanned the room without moving my head too abruptly. My eyes swept past clusters of diplomats, waiters in white gloves, military attachés, until they caught on a man at the balcony. He held a camera, too large, too heavy. The lens was pointed not at the stage or the ornate chandelier, but at a very specific area of the crowd. His posture was wrong. It was the stance of someone trained to track, not to capture a memory. The seconds stretched. I shifted my gaze toward Admiral Harrington. He was speaking with several senior officers, my father only a few feet away from him. The Admiral had never met me in person, but I knew his file, his career highlights, and more importantly, what I owed him from a distance. I felt the pulse in my ears. I checked the watch on my wrist. 90 seconds. I began to move, weaving through the crowd with the kind of pace that made people step aside without knowing why. My mind repeated the same phrase I had learned in early field training. Keep your breath, keep your mind, keep your cover. By the time I reached them, the Admiral was in mid-sentence. My father noticed me and frowned as though I was interrupting something of greater importance than whatever had brought me across the Atlantic. I stepped closer to Admiral Harrington, close enough that my voice would not carry beyond him. "Follow me, Admiral. Don't ask why." He stopped speaking. His eyes narrowed slightly, reading my face for any sign that this was a drill or a joke. He found neither. There was a pause, the kind that weighs 1,000 decisions. He began to shake his head, and I knew hesitation could cost him more than he realized. I leaned in closer. "I am Oracle." Recognition hit him like a sudden jolt. His pupils widened. The lines around his eyes shifted from doubt to urgency. Without another word, he stepped away from my father and fell into stride beside me. We took the nearest turn into a side hallway just as the sound came. Sharp, metallic, final. A bullet struck the marble wall where the Admiral had been standing less than 3 seconds earlier. The impact echoed through the corridor, followed by a wave of startled gasps from the crowd. I turned my head. My father stood frozen in place, his glass trembling in his hand. The smile he had worn earlier was gone, replaced by something I had never seen before: fear, stark and unmasked. A cold current ran along my skin, not from the brush with death, but from the certainty settling in my mind. This was no random act. And if someone could aim that precisely in this fortress of security, then what lay beneath was far deeper than anyone here suspected. And for me, this was not the end. This was the opening move. The image of the Admiral's widened eyes still lingered in my mind as we waited in the secured room after the shooting. It had been 3 years since I had last heard his name in connection with anything I touched. Yet the moment I said I am Oracle, the recognition was instant. That kind of reaction only happens when you have shared something life-altering. And in our case, that connection was forged on the burning sand of North Africa. I remember it vividly, though I never told anyone the full story. Back then, I was stationed in an intelligence coordination unit near the coast, tasked with monitoring French-language transmissions in an unstable border region. Officially, I was liaising with Allied forces. Unofficially, I was the last filter before bad information could reach good men and get them killed. It was just past midnight when the scrambled signal came in. The voice was muffled, buried under static, but the cadence, sharp, deliberate, told me it wasn't idle chatter. The French was tinged with a regional accent from the Sahel. Words clipped in a way meant to slip past machine translation. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. The message was clear enough to me once I pieced it together. Cybele Principal, Caravane, 2 heures. Primary target, convoy, 2 hours. The coordinates followed, hidden inside what sounded like meaningless market prices. I checked the operational map. The convoy scheduled to pass that route was led by a senior U.S. officer on a joint mission with local allies, Admiral Harrington himself. I alerted the duty officer, who hesitated, wanting verification. Verification meant running it through the official chain, which could take 40 minutes we didn't have. I made the call myself, sending the warning directly to the forward command post. Some called that overstepping. I called it necessary. Through the radio feed, I heard the confusion at first, then the shift in their tone when the first incoming fire cracked through the air. The convoy diverted down a secondary route moments before the main path was ambushed. Later reports counted over a dozen hostiles lying in wait, armed with weapons that would have torn through light armor. When the dust settled, the Admiral's unit returned with minimal injuries. I stayed behind my desk, finishing the shift as though nothing unusual had happened. There were no medals for me, no public commendation. In the after-action report, the intelligence source was simply marked Oracle. That was the moment I understood a truth I have carried since. You do not need the world to know your name. You only need to know that because of what you did, someone else went home alive. The rest is noise. In the days after the North Africa mission, my superiors quietly reinforced my security clearance. They told me to expect nothing, no thank you notes, no promotions tied to what had happened. Just the knowledge that I had done my job well. I accepted it. But there was one thing I could not forget. I had heard in the Admiral's voice, in those few seconds over the comms, a mix of disbelief and relief that would never leave me. Now, here in Paris, after years without contact, I had watched him relive that moment in an instant. It confirmed something else. The enemy who had aimed at him today might not be new. Some enemies don't disappear. They go quiet, regroup, and wait for their next opening. That memory from North Africa was more than just history. It was a warning, and it told me that what had just happened at the summit was not an isolated act, but the continuation of a hunt that had begun years ago. The difference this time was that the battlefield was not open desert. It was marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a room full of people who thought they were safe. And I knew, better than most, that safety is often the most dangerous illusion of all. The secured room emptied after my debrief. The French gendarmerie sealed the mezzanine and the balcony where the shot had been taken. Summit security pushed a preliminary report across the table. The team recovered a modular rifle disguised as a professional camera. The barrel was sleeved inside a hollow telephoto lens. The tripod was a stabilized mount built to hide recoil. The shooter abandoned the assembly and slipped through a service corridor. A laminated press badge lay near the exit. The badge stock was genuine, but the printed data was false. The photograph had been spliced from 2 headshots with different lighting. In a trash bin behind the service elevator, they found a passport. The binding was authentic. The identity was not. The name belonged to a man whose real passport had been reported stolen in Marseille last year. Whoever planned this understood how to borrow credibility while hiding behind stolen identity. I stayed silent while the French lead briefed the security cell. The American detail listened. The coordinators kept their voices low. When they finished, I asked for the serial numbers on the tripod and the lens sleeve. The numbers had been acid-etched and filled. Under oblique light, a halo remained. I requested the metadata from the burner phone's single image. The timestamp aligned with the window when I heard the whisper in my earpiece. While we waited, I mapped the balcony sightline in my head. From that elevation, a clean exit required either an inside escort or a rehearsal during setup hours. That pointed to a contractor with regular access, catering, audiovisual, logistics. The French officer nodded and sent a runner to pull vendor rosters. I offered to scan for patterns across company registrations. It is the kind of task I pretend is dull. Yet I sleep better when I am the one doing it. By late evening, an Interpol liaison flagged a link. The stolen passport had been used to rent a short-term flat near the river. The lease intermediary traced back to a holding company registered in Luxembourg. Thin capitalization, nominee directors. A mailing address shared with dozens of entities. The name on the registration meant little, Origine Conseil. The filings showed a subsidiary that had briefly operated a logistics arm in Belgium before dissolving. I read the PDFs until a shape formed. 3 interlocking chevrons. A minimalist logo in the footer. I knew I had seen it before in a report from months ago. A footnote few people noticed. The line item described cross-border freight, maritime warehousing, consulting for energy projects, legitimate on paper, a shell in practice. I left the secured room and walked the corridor to the delegation office, where my father had been given space for his meetings. The guard checked my credential and waved me in. On the table sat mineral water, a plate of crushed macarons, and a stack of glossy folders. I moved slower than usual, not because I was searching, because I already suspected what I would find. On the top folder was a non-disclosure agreement stamped in English and French. Beneath it lay a draft memorandum of understanding between my father's firm and a European consultancy. The logo in the corner halted my breath. 3 interlocking chevrons, identical angles, identical spacing. I did not need a second look. I pressed my palm flat on the desk, not to steady myself, to stop my hand from reaching for my phone too early. Time matters in investigations. So does restraint. I photographed each page in sequence, the logo, the signatory lines, the contact name for Origine Conseil's representative, a Luxembourg number, a secondary address in Brussels attached to a shuttered warehouse. My father had circled a meeting time for the next morning and scribbled a note. Confirm access badges. Confirm press walkthrough. The words landed with a weight I could feel in my bones. In my world, coincidence is what we call proximity, when we are afraid to say connection. I stepped back into the corridor and felt the chill of the marble through the soles of my shoes. The evidence did not prove guilt. It did not even prove intent. It proved proximity. And proximity is the first shadow that precedes a storm. I saved the images to an encrypted drive. Then I breathed once, steady and deep, and walked toward the lab to see what the etched metal would give back. I left the lab near midnight. The city had that glassy silence that follows sirens and cordons tonight. The river held a thin strip of moonlight. The driver let me out without small talk. I climbed the stairs because my body trusts stairs. Halfway down the hall I knew. My door sat too flush to the frame. The brass around the cylinder had fresh crescents. My key met resistance. The bolt dragged as if the door had learned a new language. I stood still and listened. The apartment breathed in a pattern that was not mine. A faint citrus cleaner hung in the air where I usually smelled paper dust and black tea. A dining chair faced the window. I never leave it that way. The smallest details tell the loudest stories. Tonight they shouted. I kept my right hand free. I am not a cop. I am a sailor who learned to move quietly when quiet keeps people alive. From the threshold, the living room seemed intact. 20 steps later, I could see the staging. Magazines aligned with unnatural precision. A coaster rotated exactly 90 degrees. The bookshelf showed a thin ghost line where a lever arch file once pressed dust flat. On my desk, the laptop sat half open. The power light pulsed. A rectangle of adhesive clung to the webcam. The intruder protected their anonymity in a room that should have needed no disguises. The first hard absence was the external drive that held working notes. The second was the physical binder labeled in pencil, North Africa, liaison traffic. I keep nothing classified at home. The binder contained translations I made for myself, timelines, maps printed with public overlays. The thief knew enough to want the pattern and the human margins, not the headlines. When an enemy crosses your threshold, every idea of safety collapses. The sentence formed and etched itself behind my ribs. It does. I backed away from the desk and looked down. No glass, no mud, only a shallow twist in the rug where a boot had pivoted. The latch sensor on the door had been taped and then untaped. The tape residue still had a wet edge. The kitchen window carried fresh tool marks, a staged entry to distract from the lock. Whoever came here rehearsed their route. They touched just enough surfaces to pivot. They touched almost nothing else. I called the duty number for the regional task force, reported an intrusion, left out names they did not need. Need to know keeps people breathing. I asked the building manager to freeze camera footage from noon, requested copies to secure storage. I texted my neighbor on 3, had her hear any barking. Her dog had growled at 9:20. On the back of a receipt, I built a timeline with anchors. The line looked like a measured heartbeat. The bedroom closet safe bore new scratches near the keypad. Whoever tried it knew the brand but not the hands that open it. Inside, the passport and the pair of medals I never display remained. So did a sealed letter I refused to read. They were not hunting valuables. They were hunting context, memory, leverage. I checked under the bed frame and found nothing except a single speck of gray plastic. Likely from a glove box, unhelpful alone, telling in a pattern. On the way back to the desk, I noticed a paperclip on the floor beneath the lamp. It had been bent into 3 chevrons. The shape matched the logo in the Luxembourg filings. The same precise geometry, the same quiet arrogance. It was a calling card, or a wink, or a dare. I photographed every angle, captured dust halos and shoe scuffs, saved the set to encrypted storage, then sat in the only chair that had not been moved and slowed my breathing. I remembered the afternoon my father taught me to rekey a lock. He said the world respects people who can enter any room. I believed him then, I do not now. The only rooms worth standing in are the ones you defend. I powered down the laptop and pulled the battery. Wrote a single line to find in the morning. Do not chase, draw. I checked the bolt twice, listened as traffic faded, and began turning sanctuary into staging. I asked to see my father at dawn. The hotel cafe was half lit in Paris. He arrived. I stood to greet him. He offered a quick hug that never landed on my shoulders. I placed a folder on the table. His eyes flicked to it, then away. I need 5 minutes, I said. No press language, no lawyers. You always liked rules, he answered, signaling for coffee. Make it quick. I have a breakfast with partners. I slid the first page across, a memorandum bearing 3 interlocking chevrons. What is Origine Conseil, I asked. And why is their logo on your deal sheet? He held the paper with 2 fingers as if it might smear. He did not read. He measured. Consulting, he said. Supply chains, port access, just commerce. Just commerce, I repeated. Then why did you circle a note that says confirm access badges? Confirm press walkthrough. He exhaled through his nose. Venue logistics. I know you think the world moves through secret doors. Some of us still enter through the front. The shooter did not, I said. Security found a rifle inside a camera housing, a forged press badge, a stolen passport from Marseille. The rental flat links to a Luxembourg shell behind Origine's paper trail. Look at me and tell me you do not know that logo. His gaze dropped to the saucer. You are drawing lines between dots because you live in a room made of dots. He pushed the page back. Do not make a mess of adult business. The old dismissal tried to find the old bruise. I let it pass. I am not here as your daughter, I said. I am here as the officer who moved an admiral out of a kill box, because I heard a whisper in French. If the company courting you is a cutout, they will use your name as a bridge. They will step over you when it collapses. The waiter set 2 coffees down. Steam rose. My father used the moment to hide his face. When he dropped his hand, I saw something new. Not contempt. A tremor smothered under a smile. Fear looks small when it first appears. It shows up in knuckles and pupils. Leave this, he said. Let the agencies do their job. Let me do mine. They will, I said. And they will ask why your calendar mentions access to badges. Why your list includes a warehouse in Brussels with no staff. Why your drafts share metadata with a suite that rents to sham boards. They will ask if I warned you. I will tell them the truth. He leaned forward. You do not understand leverage. These people make ports open. They make inspections smooth. They make permits appear. You call them shells, but shells are how deals begin. Shells also hide hands, I said. Whose hand is inside this one? A tick pulsed near his temple. He lifted the coffee, then set it down untouched. Do you think I would ever place you at risk? He asked. You already did, I answered. Someone entered my apartment. They took my North Africa notes. They bent a paperclip into 3 chevrons and left it on my floor. His eyes found mine then. Really found them. The fear I had guessed at drifted to the surface. He swallowed. You were not supposed to be part of this, he said. I am part of it by design or by accident, I said. Either way, I will not let you become a ledger entry for people who move goods and bury evidence under invoices. He stared past me at the river. It is just commerce, he said again. The words sounded thinner, more like a line he had been given than one he believed. Then help me prove it, I said. Or walk away before they decide you're easier to control than to pay. For a long beat he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his tone had softened. I cannot walk away today, he said. But I can move the meeting. I can delay signatures. Delay is not safety, I said. It is time. Use it to choose. He stood, he smoothed his tie. He nodded as if we had negotiated a rate. As he turned, his eyes betrayed him. Not cold, not cruel. Just human and afraid. That was the reversal. I watched him go, then gathered the pages and counted my breaths. The day had begun. The clock had too. I left the cafe and walked along the river. My father's fear had given me something better than permission. It had given me a clock. I needed to know who held the other end of the line. The logo with 3 interlocking chevrons was my thread. I pulled it through restricted databases and through sources who prefer questions that sound like favors. Origin Conseil did not exist the way a builder's company exists. It existed the way a coat rack stands in an empty hallway. Shell entities hung from it. Subsidiaries opened and closed within a year. Affiliates shared directors who signed in neat loops and never appeared in photographs. The Brussels warehouse in my father's notes showed no payroll. A security vendor billed for cameras that never connected to a network. The pattern simplified as the map widened. Freight forwarders in Antwerp and Le Havre. Bonded storage near small ports where customs officers rotate. Maritime brokers filing amendments minutes before midnight. On paper, Origin moved liquid fuels and industrial components. Inside the data, they moved metadata. Bills of lading carried QR codes that resolved to vendor portals. The portals hosted brochures. Download logs spiked whenever convoys deployed or fleet schedules shifted. Intelligence can ride inside commercial paperwork when no one thinks to look. I asked the Interpol liaison to check forged press badges issued to vendors tied to event logistics. 3 hits returned. 2 covered walkthroughs where Origin sponsored panels. The third matched the badge style used by the shooter. Setup footage showed a man with the same gait as the balcony suspect. He wore an audio-visual contractor vest. He lingered by the mezzanine window and measured angles with a pocket laser. Rehearsal, not improvisation. Access granted by routine. Exit rehearsed during setup hours while everyone looked the other way. That link gave the attempt on the Admiral a new frame. The shot was not personal revenge. It was network defense. If the Admiral recognized me publicly, or if he started asking questions about a pattern he had never needed to see, the people behind Origin would face subpoenas. Remove the senior officer who might become curious, destabilize the conversation, keep the freight moving. A body is the bluntest kind of non-disclosure agreement. I traced payments. Transfers moved from the Luxembourg holding to a consulting firm in Tangier and a mirror firm in Marseille. Both filed identical expense categories. One vendor listed translation services at rates that would buy a small house. Another billed for press coordination and badge verification. Origin did not only move information, it curated rooms where information could be stolen in public without anyone realizing anything had left. My father's position made more sense with every page. A mid-sized American firm, a portfolio that touched ports, energy, and insurance, a founder who liked fast lanes and direct numbers. He thought he was buying efficiency. Origin was buying a bridge into American respectability. If the deal closed, their chevrons would sit next to his logo on press backdrops, legitimacy draped like a borrowed uniform. I called the Admiral through the back channel and gave him the diagram I had sketched. Nodes for warehouses, edges for vendor portals, dotted lines for people who signed everything and said nothing. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked a single question. "Do you think your father knows the depth?" I answered plainly. "He knows enough to be afraid and not enough to run." We split the work. He would press the diplomatic side to freeze vendor access. I would push the financial end to flag transfers through the Luxembourg window. I sent a list to Summit Security. Pull every contractor with clearance who logged mezzanine access after hours. Require in-person verification for all press badges. Halt walkthroughs. When networks are built from favors, removing convenience breaks their spine. By midnight, the wall showed seams. Origin's listed director resigned by email. The address bounced after one reply. The Brussels lease agent answered no calls. A secondary shell merged into a new name with the same chevrons tilted 2 degrees. I recognized the move the way a medic recognizes a recurring pulse, a snake shedding skin while keeping the bite. I stared at the last open screen and felt the quiet arrive, the kind of quiet that means a map finally matches the ground. The enemy was not a man with a rifle. The enemy was a system that bent ceremony into cover. You cannot arrest a logo. You can make it useless. That is where I intended to begin. He taught me the sentence long before I earned a uniform. In the military or in business, information is life. He said it while he rewired a lamp in the garage. He said it again the first time he showed me how to rekey a lock without scratching the brass. He liked the feel of small parts clicking into place. He liked the quiet power of knowing how a mechanism thinks. My childhood sounded like newspapers unfolding and radios murmuring in the kitchen. Figures and shipping routes snaked across the margins of his notes. He kept a French dictionary beside the cereal bowls. He would point at a new word and ask me to say it twice. It felt like a game. It was training. At night, he lined up 3 index cards: supplier, buyer, carrier, then made me tell a story that connected them. If my story left a gap, he would tap the table with a spoon and smile. A gap is where a deal hides risk. When he wore his old service jacket, he stood differently. His back remembered a version of him that had once believed rules were enough. He never talked about deployments. He talked logistics. How crates move, how people follow the promise of time saved. On Saturdays, he took me to the harbor. We watched cranes rise and lower. He would whisper the sentence again like a catechism. In the military or in business, information is life. I learned to listen the way he did. For what people repeat, for what they never say. I learned to steady my breath during spelling tests. I learned that my mind worked best when my breathing did not announce my fear. When I told him I wanted the Navy, his mouth twitched as if he were proud and worried. He bought me a pocket notebook and wrote the sentence inside the cover, then underlined it twice. He added a line, "Trust is earned by accuracy." He taught me first aid on the kitchen floor. He taught me to scan for exits as if scanning were a type of courtesy. He said one day I would understand survival feels ordinary, that saving someone often looks like handing them a glass of water. I believed him. When I learned French to fluency, he kept quizzing me after dinner. He liked idioms that do not translate cleanly. He said they reveal where a culture hides its weather. Now I carry those lessons like tools. Each has a weight that my hands remember, which is why his silence these past weeks feels stranger than any risk I manage at work. I stood in his office yesterday and watched the man who taught me that information is life refuse to share the one thing that could keep him breathing. He looked smaller, not because he is weak, because fear will fold a person inward until even a large room cannot hold them. When I look back, I can see how the sentence bent as he used it. In business, information is leverage. In politics, it is currency. In families, it should be trust. Somewhere between boardrooms and late flights, the word shifted. Life became profit. The rest was a rounding error. He would hate hearing that. He might not deny it. I am not angry the way I was at 20. Anger burns attention you need for details. I am not cold either. I have saved many people to pretend I do not feel. What I feel is a steady ache where respect used to sit. A muscle that learned pressure and now remembers pain. The same man who trained me to hear danger hid his when it finally knocked. He told me once that every system reveals itself under stress. The same is true of people. I cannot change what he did not say. I can change what happens next. The girl who learned chevrons and harbor rhythms is the woman who reads shells and invoices. The sentence still matters. I repeat it with new clarity. In the military or in business, information is life. I intend to honor the part of him that taught me well by refusing the part of him that stayed silent when lives were at stake. Mine, the Admiral's, his own. I started with breath. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The rhythm that keeps my hands steady when the room wants to rush me. Silent alarm is not a siren. It is a chain of small, accurate motions repeated until the truth gathers its own weight. I powered a clean laptop. No prior logins, no cached certificates. I connected through a secure line and opened a workspace that timestamps every keystroke. The first folder carried a plain name, invoices. The second carried a quieter one, chevrons. Email, first. I pulled copies from my father's shared meeting account. Not bodies of messages, only headers. Sender paths, SPF and DKIM results. Relay timestamps. I printed nothing, paper leaks. Instead, I hashed each file and wrote the hash in a notebook with a blue ballpoint, ink that does not bleed when photographed. Most messages were boilerplate. A few were not. An address from Luxembourg signed as Origine, but routed through a French residential provider. Another from Brussels, bounced through a boutique relay that specializes in hiding marketing metrics. A message time-stamped minutes after the attempted shooting referenced press movement. Its return path skipped a hop it had used all week. Habits change when hands shake. Facts next. The hotel still keeps a machine for clients who like paper trails. Good. Machine headers mark date, time, and line. I requested the sending logs and compared caller IDs with the roster of summit vendors. 2 matched a temp staffing firm that provided event ushers. I asked for the original pages, not for what they said, for the smudges along the left margin where a misaligned feeder leaves fingerprints and toner. The same smear appeared on a second fax sent to the shuttered warehouse in Brussels. Different content, identical mechanical flaw. Patterns testify even when people refuse to. Calls last. I set a recorder beside the desk phone with a passive tap. It stamps time and captures the tone that precedes an international connection. I returned 2 messages from a number listed under media coordination. The man who answered spoke English with French cadence. He volunteered to walk me through access points for the press pool. I let him talk. I asked simple questions, then repeated answers with small errors to see which parts he corrected. People correct what matters to them. He corrected the camera corridor twice. He corrected press badge handoff 3 times. He never corrected the mezzanine window. His silence told me more than his sentences. While channels warmed, I documented rooms. I photographed door frames for Primarks, cataloged the sequence of chairs in my father's temporary office, captured how far the blinds hung from the sill. Every detail becomes an anchor when a story tries to float away. I used a steel ruler to show scale and a small flashlight at a shallow angle to lift scratches out of hiding. On the conference table, a single paperclip waited, bent into 3 interlocking chevrons. I placed it in a labeled envelope, chain A, item 1, then wrote the location, time, and my initials. I built a timeline on the clean laptop. Not a narrative, a spine. Left column for time, center for event, right for source. 16 entries by noon, no adjectives. My job when I do this is not to feel clever, it is to be reliable. I added cross-references to show when an email from Origin aligned with a scheduled walkthrough, when a fax to Brussels preceded a meeting request at the Harbor Cafe. When a call about press badges drifted near the hour, a bullet cracked the marble. In the afternoon, I met quietly with a French security analyst who owed me a favor from a translation job. We sat in a side office that smelled like toner and coffee. I slid him 3 headers and 2 fax images. He slid back a list of vendor IDs mapped to the mezzanine. One caught my eye. The audio-visual firm that staffed the setup had subcontracted a tiny company established 2 months ago. No web presence. Accounts opened and closed inside one billing cycle. A logo that looked like chevrons turned 45 degrees. I tested my assumptions. I wrote 3 sentences that accused no one, then asked whether a reasonable outsider could reach the same link without my history. If the answer was no, I erased the line and hunted a cleaner path. Confirmation feels good. Discipline keeps you honest. I logged deletions as carefully as fines. Future me deserves to know why a road was closed. For chain of custody, I created a checksum ledger. Each artifact received a hash, a time, a place. Each change generated a new line. I ran passive lookups on domains and headers. The registrar in Luxembourg reused contact numbers that appeared on a dissolved shell in Tangier. The support inbox forwarded to a catch-all that never replies. I walked the mezzanine with a maintenance escort and stood where the lens raked the hall. The angle cleared the stage lights, but clipped the rig. The shooter had tested this earlier. Scuffs on the rail matched the tripod feet found in the bin. I took a last breath. Calm is not decoration. Calm is method. The Admiral reached me through the back channel 20 minutes after I filed my latest chain of custody notes. The phone did not ring. It hummed once with a code that meant no recording and no names. I stepped into a maintenance stairwell. I locked the door behind me and stood still and listened. His voice carried the quiet of someone who has commanded rooms and learned when not to fill them. Calder, I am offering support. I am also asking for discretion. He waited for breath. Mine stayed even. I understand, sir. You were at a desk the night North Africa nearly turned into a memorial. You think you warned a convoy. You did more. The line whispered as he shifted. We had an allied advisor riding with us. Later we learned he had been squeezed by the same people you are tracking. He was sending our position by embedding numbers into routine check-ins. Your translation caught the cadence. Your override forced me off the primary. That decision broke the timing of a second team set to collapse the route behind us. If we had stayed on the primary, the follow-on team would have boxed us between 2 arcs of fire. The stairwell seemed smaller. The words did not glamorize. They measured weight. No report mentioned an advisor, I said. It did not need to. The objective was to stop the bleed, not feed the press. I read your after-action note and heard a person who understands that accuracy is a kind of mercy. That is why when you said Oracle, I moved. He let that sit, then shifted to the present. I have pulled a limited liaison cell away from public duty. 3 investigators. 1 legal officer who knows how to phrase a request, so a judge signs without grandstanding. If you provide the headers and the vendor map, I can freeze the contractor rosters for the mezzanine and require physical reissue of badges. No publicity, only friction. Friction buys time, time buys choice, I said. Correct. I will also press the diplomatic side to request that Luxembourg flag Origin's bank activity. They will resist. Then they will comply because they like not being named. I gave him a distilled version of my findings, the chevrons, the false press badge, the subcontractor that existed for 1 billing cycle. He asked precise questions, never asked the same thing twice. When I finished, he took a longer breath. There is one more piece you never saw, he said. An image from a drone covering our flank in North Africa. The team waiting to close the route carried a banner rolled in a pack. They planned to stage a rescue and film an escort to the border. A show. Propaganda requires not only bodies. It requires a narrative of incompetence. Someone promised them our capture at a time marked in that message you decrypted. You did not only save us, you denied them a story. The sentence touched something under my sternum. Anger, yes, but also a clarity that steadies hands. Then they are not improvising now, I said. They are protecting a revenue stream that sells access and spectacle. Exactly, which is why I will not ask you to step aside. I will ask you to let me put a buffer around you. You will continue your work. My team will lift doors you cannot open without risking your commission. Understood, sir. He gave me a drop location for physical media, a room used for coat check during the day. A cleaning cart would cover the transfer. 2 hours, he said. After that, the coat check becomes a stage again. Before he signed off, he added one more line. I knew your father when he wore a different kind of ambition. If he is afraid, it is because he has met the kind of people who trade on fear. Fear makes smart men quiet. Do not let it make you loud. Be precise. The call ended. The stairwell returned to metal and dust. I wrote the time in my ledger. I wrote his instruction in the margin. Be precise. Then I pocketed the phone, breathed to 4 again, and walked out into the corridor where the summit still glittered as if marble could muffle intent. My brother Ethan called me between meetings. His number appeared without a name because I disabled contact sync for summit work. I answered in a quiet alcove near the coat check. His first words were not hello. He asked if I could come home for the weekend. Then he caught his breath and said, never mind, because he already knew. I let the silence do its work. 10 seconds, then 15. He filled it the way he does when worry wins. I opened my ledger. Habit keeps panic from writing. Dad is not sleeping, he said. The lines around his eyes look like graphite. He keeps reading the same page. Payroll hit Friday, and he stared at the ledger the way a person stares at a locked door from the wrong side. The bank called twice about a covenant test. A credit line might tighten if one more shipment slips. Did Dad tell you this? I asked. No. He saw the messages on a screen our father left open. He recognized the clipped tone that appears when people feel cornered. I told him I was listening. I did not say where I stood with a recorder in my pocket. He said Dad booked a meeting with a European consultant who promised to clear bottlenecks at 2 ports. The consultant wanted a retainer wired through Luxembourg. The pitch claimed the money would never be spent, because influence would save more than the fee. It sounded like magic, the tired kind people buy when they run out of time. Dad nodded very slowly, as if relief hurt to hold in his mouth. I asked about threats, not to lead him, to test the air. Ethan went quiet. Then he said our father changed how he parks. He circled the block twice on Tuesday and asked Ethan to take a different route home. He replaced the front door deadbolt with a higher-grade model and wedged a stopper under the back door at night. Ethan heard the wood creak when the wedge bit. I wrote each detail, not because I doubted him, because fear leaves a pattern you can read with slow breaths. The twist arrived sideways. Ethan said Dad asked about me in a tone he did not recognize. Had I been to the apartment? Had I changed my locks? Had I noticed a man under the streetlight across from my building? He tried to make it sound casual. It did not land that way. My grip tightened on the phone. The paperclip bent into chevrons on my floor. The missing North Africa notes. The balcony rifle disguised as a camera. The logo on his contract. Everything clicked together like teeth. Hard. So it is not only money, I said. Ethan exhaled. He overheard a call where a calm voice told our father that delays would be expensive, then added a line that made him want to throw the phone in the sink. Tell your daughter to be careful. City doors are thin. He worried he misheard the phrase. I told him he had not. Bullies like metaphors that masquerade as advice. They prefer threatening through slogans because slogans sound respectable until you hear them twice. He hated how it sounded. Deeply. I softened my voice. I asked if Dad looked cornered or compromised. Ethan said both. He moved the photo of Mom from the hallway to his desk and kept touching the frame during calls as if it were a talisman. He started carrying cash again, not much. Enough to suggest he no longer trusts a card trail. He stopped wearing his loudest cufflinks. He stopped laughing after saying just a translator. Ethan said he missed that laugh even when it stung. Absence can make a house feel unfamiliar inside. I told Ethan to forward nothing, to screenshot nothing, to write times and phrases and put the paper in a drawer. I told him to stop opening Dad's laptop. Curiosity can start a fire when the room is full of gas. He asked if I was angry. I said no. Anger is a stage and we are in the planning one. He asked if I would come home. I said soon, when safe. After the call, I logged details. The case was leverage braided with fear and pointed at family. The gala hall glowed in a way only old European money can arrange. Gold leaf curling around ceiling panels. Crystal chandeliers dripping light onto polished parquet. A stage draped in deep blue velvet with the summit's crest printed in perfect symmetry. The tables were dressed in linen that felt heavy enough to stop a blade. Each place set with 3 forks, 2 knives, and crystal that caught the light like trapped water. The air carried the perfume of white flowers and the faint tang of champagne poured long before guests arrived. I sat at a guest table near the middle, far enough from the stage to observe, close enough to read the lines around a speaker's eyes. My seat faced the podium at a slight angle. I wanted to see both the stage and the audience without turning my head. Across the table, a French trade delegate smiled politely and said something about the menu. I nodded, but my attention was tuned to the edges of the room, where the doors were, who guarded them, and which waiters moved with too much purpose. At the head table, my father adjusted his cufflinks, the same pair he had sworn off wearing 2 weeks ago. His tie was a muted silver, the safe choice for men who want to signal gravitas without seeming flamboyant. He glanced at the notes in front of him but did not read. Instead, he watched the front rows fill. To the casual eye, he looked like a man moments away from delivering a speech about market expansion and cross-border cooperation. To me, he looked like a man trying to balance on a rope that shifted under every breath. The master of ceremonies called for attention. The polite clinking of silver on glass rang out, followed by the settling hush of hundreds of conversations cutting at once. I felt it in my chest the way I feel an oncoming storm, pressure lowering, air thickening. My fingers rested lightly on the stem of my water glass, not drinking, just anchoring. Beside the stage, the screens cycled through sponsor logos, pausing on the 3 interlocking chevrons of Origine Conseil for just long enough to make my jaw tighten. I counted 2 camera crews and 1 freelance photographer angling for shots of the handshake that would crown the evening. Somewhere behind those lenses, someone else might be angling for something far less ceremonial. I had mapped every entrance in my head before sitting down, 2 guarded by uniformed staff in black jackets, 1 service door near the kitchen, and a narrow corridor by the AV booth that led to a stairwell. That corridor worried me, the mezzanine sightline from the attempted shooting still etched in my mind. I caught a glimpse of the AV subcontractor's logo, rotated chevrons. My pulse stayed steady, but I tightened my breathing pattern to 3 counts in, 5 counts out. My father rose when his name was called. The applause was warm but not thunderous, polite acknowledgement rather than devotion. He walked to the podium with the same gait I remembered from childhood, purposeful, but slightly too quick when he wanted to get something over with. He adjusted the microphone, smoothed his notes, and offered the first practice smile to the room. I watched the light on his face, the way it shifted when the stage wash caught him squarely. His eyes flickered once to the guest tables, maybe to find me, maybe to avoid me. He began with a story about the first contract his company ever signed in Europe, weaving in a line about shared values and efficiency. The words flowed, but I heard the undercurrent, a man reciting a script while a separate, silent conversation raged in his head. Around us, champagne flutes lifted, heads nodded at familiar platitudes. I felt the urge to look over my shoulder, to find the Admiral in the crowd, to gauge how ready he was for what might come next. But I kept my gaze forward. The air in the room was charged, as if every person sensed something unspoken pressing against the edge of the evening. It was not the speech that held me, it was the waiting. Every syllable he spoke was another second closer to the moment when the storm would break, and I could feel the first gusts brushing the back of my neck. Halfway through my father's speech, the kind where each sentence feels polished by committee, movement at the edge of the stage caught my eye. Admiral Harrington stepped out from the shadows of the front row, his uniform jacket immaculate, his expression the measured calm of someone used to being the gravity in any room. He didn't wait for my father to finish his paragraph. He didn't even take the podium as if asking permission. If it weren't for Oracle, he began, his voice cutting through the soft hum of translation headsets and the muffled clink of cutlery, I would not be standing here tonight. The words landed with weight, Conversations died mid-syllable. Camera shutters froze. The MC glanced at the stage manager with the silent question, "Do we stop this?" The Admiral continued without looking at him. 3 years ago, during a joint operation in North Africa, a piece of intelligence came through at a time when it could have been buried in bureaucracy. It was precise, timely, and delivered by someone who understood that accuracy can be the difference between life and death. We lived because of that call sign, Oracle. He paused, letting the word rest in the room. Heads tilted toward one another, whispers asking who it was. My father's hands tightened around the sides of the podium. His smile had not vanished yet, but it no longer reached his eyes. From somewhere behind the press line, a voice called out, English tinged with an international accent. "Who is Oracle?" The question rippled forward. Photographers shifted their focus from the Admiral to the audience, scanning for a reaction. In that pause, the room inhaled as one. Every microphone leaned in. My father's gaze swept the tables like a man searching for an exit in a place with no doors. The sine wave spiked here, silence so deep it was almost audible. No coughs, no silverware. Even the hum of the AV equipment seemed to drop, as if the building itself was waiting to hear the answer. I rose from my seat slowly enough that every eye could find me before I spoke. The chair's legs brushed against the floor with a deliberate scrape, grounding me in the moment. My heels clicked once, twice, as I stepped clear of the tablecloth's edge. I didn't look at the press first. I looked at my father. His face was composed, but his eyes blinked, just once, more slowly than usual. It was the first time I'd seen him without that impenetrable layer of superiority. In French, clear and unhurried, I said, "La fille que vous avez sous-estimée." The interpreter's feed didn't need to translate for most of the journalists, but the English line still echoed a second later, "The daughter you underestimated." Gasps mixed with the rapid click of camera shutters. The Admiral gave a small nod, the kind given between professionals who have stood on the same side of a line most people never see. A ripple of murmurs passed through the front rows, some recognition, some disbelief. My father's jaw tightened. He did not speak. In that stillness, I could almost hear the weight of the years between us, of the lessons he gave me and the moments when he forgot to live by them himself. I didn't elaborate. The power of that sentence was in its precision, the same way the call sign Oracle carried weight without needing a biography. This was my poetic justice, not a public shaming with a list of accusations, but a single truth delivered in the language he once insisted I learn because, in his words, power respects fluency. Now, fluency had turned the mirror back toward him. The MC cleared his throat, unsure if he should rest the evening back on script. The Admiral stepped aside, leaving the space between us charged but unspoken. I returned to my seat as deliberately as I had stood, the silence giving way to a swell of whispered speculation and the distant clicking of news alerts being typed. Across the room, my father blinked again, slower still, and in that tiny fracture, I saw the absence of the arrogance that had shadowed so many of our conversations. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing I had ever received. And in that moment, it was enough. The news cycle didn't wait for the gala to end. By the time I left the hall, headlines were already running. Mystery Navy officer revealed as Oracle at International Summit. Business tycoon's daughter interrupts speech with coded military past. Clips of the Admiral's words and my reply in French hit social media within an hour. The reaction split down a clean fracture. One side called it courage. Finally, someone with a spine willing to draw a line, no matter the personal cost. Comment threads filled with veterans, diplomats, and strangers who wrote that truth, even inconvenient truth, has a place in public rooms. The other side was less generous. They accused me of grandstanding, of dragging a family dispute into a venue meant for diplomacy and commerce. Some claimed I had embarrassed the delegation, that I should have handled it quietly behind closed doors. The phrase appeared often enough that I knew it wasn't organic. It was seated. I read enough to understand the tone, then stopped. Attention is a currency you can't spend twice. In my line of work, letting noise dictate your next step is the fastest way to lose the thread that matters. Still, the whispers carried even into official spaces. A junior attaché avoided meeting my eye. An industry rep shook my hand and said nothing about the weather, just good luck, in a tone that carried both warning and respect. The storm was here, and it wasn't just in the headlines. It was in the way people paused mid-sentence when I entered a room. I didn't rush to defend myself. Truth often divides before it unites. That's not a flaw, it's the nature of it. The moment you expose something that's been buried, the light doesn't heal immediately. It irritates. It makes people blink. It forces them to see. I reminded myself that my role wasn't to be liked. It was to make sure the pieces fell where they could be picked up by the right hands. The summons came within 48 hours. My father was called to a closed-door inquiry in the host city. The press framed it as standard procedure. But anyone with half an ear for these things knew the optics were lethal. Contracts signed in champagne rooms don't survive even the rumor of compromised partners. By the third day, his company's pending agreement with Origine Conseil was officially suspended pending review. That phrasing was corporate diplomacy for dead, unless a miracle occurs. His PR team issued a statement about cooperation with authorities. It was bland, but that was the point. In public, my father did not fight. He walked into the inquiry with his suit pressed, his tie steady, and his eyes hidden behind the same calm he had worn in boardrooms for decades. But in the moments between cameras, I caught the slope of his shoulders. It was subtle, the kind of wear you only see if you've known a man's posture your entire life. The set of his jaw told me he was conserving strength. We didn't speak during those days, not out of hostility, but because the air between us was crowded with other voices, investigators, lawyers, the relentless background hum of speculation. I watched from a distance, careful not to become part of his legal exposure. My work had to remain separate, even if my bloodline didn't. I kept telling myself that the best thing I could give him now was the same thing I'd given in North Africa. Clarity at the right moment, without expecting thanks. He left the inquiry one evening through a side exit, away from the press. As he passed the waiting car, his hand went briefly to the small of his back, a gesture I'd seen after long deployments or too many hours at a desk. It wasn't defeat, it was strain, and I knew strain could be turned in either direction, into collapse or into resolve. The confirmation came from a source I trusted in the liaison cell, a woman who'd built her career finding the smallest loose threads in the largest tapestries. She told me that, during one of the closed sessions, my father had provided details not asked for in the official questions. He had named a middleman who handled logistics facilitation for Origine, a name absent from every public filing. He described a meeting in which the man carried a folder of pre-cleared press passes, complete with embedded chips that would bypass standard scans. The detail was specific enough to prompt a secondary investigation. It wasn't a clean confession. He didn't say, "I knew," but he offered the kind of precision you can only get from being close enough to smell the ink on the documents. And in doing so, he gave the network one more fracture to worry about. When my source told me, I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was a shift, subtle but real, the sense that the man who once taught me information as life was in some part remembering his own lesson. He didn't reach out to tell me himself. There was no sudden phone call, no olive branch in the form of an apology. But I've learned that change rarely announces itself in the moment. More often, it moves quietly, in decisions that are easier to make in the shadows than under a spotlight. It was a human twist in a story that had been running on hard edges, proof that fear doesn't always lead to silence, and that even those who hesitate can, when the right lever is pulled, decide to act. For me, it was enough to keep going. Enough to remind me that the path to justice isn't a straight line. It's a series of small turns, some taken by people you thought would never step in your direction. The sweep came faster than I expected. Once the inquiries were complete and the frozen rosters cross-referenced, warrants began to fall like dominoes. A string of mid-level officials in customs and port authority offices were taken into custody, some in their homes before dawn, others at their desks in full view of colleagues. Several businessmen with ties to Origine Conseil were detained at Charles de Gaulle before boarding flights to non-extradition countries. The Brussels warehouse was raided. Inside, investigators found racks of boxed media equipment that, when uncrated, turned out to be compartmentalized containers for microdrives and encrypted sat phones. The same Chevron logo appeared on every shipping manifest, tucked in the fine print like a watermark for those who knew to look. News outlets tried to stitch together the narrative, but without the classified pieces, the story read like a patchwork: corruption probe, cross-border smuggling, security breach at an international summit. The true arc, the one that began with a voice in French and a camera that wasn't a camera, stayed sealed where it belonged. Inside the Navy, though, the commendation came. Not in a public ceremony, but in a closed room with the Admiral and 2 other officers present. He handed me a slim folder. No ribbon, no applause. My name appeared on a citation for extraordinary initiative under conditions of potential international compromise. The call sign, Oracle, remained, as always, the operative signature. It was a recognition that would never touch the papers, and that was exactly how it had to be. My work wasn't for headlines. It was for moments like North Africa, like the balcony in Paris, where one person moves at the right time and changes the ending. Still, even in victory, the shadow remained. Networks like Origin don't dissolve overnight. They fragment, go to ground, wait for the water to settle. The storm had broken, but I knew the sea beneath was far from calm. 2 weeks after the arrests, I was back in D.C., walking along the Potomac in the early evening. The river was flat, reflecting the pale gold of a sky that hadn't yet decided whether to rain. I stopped near the railing where joggers sometimes lean to stretch, feeling the damp metal under my hands. Footsteps slowed behind me. I didn't turn until he spoke. "Homjo, if you hadn't been there." My father's voice carried the same timbre I'd known since childhood, but without its usual iron. He let the words hang, unfinished. The pause between them said more than the sentence could have. I nodded once, not to dismiss it, but to mark it. We stood side by side, looking at the water, the way people do when looking at each other feels too sharp. No apology came. There was no embrace, no cinematic reconciliation. Just the river moving in its quiet rhythm and the weight of what had been said and left unsaid, pressing between us. The silence was not hostile. It was heavy in the way steel is heavy. Dense, compressed, the product of forces neither of us needed to name. I understood then that this was as much as he could give, and maybe as much as I could take. He shifted his weight, straightened his jacket, and looked toward the bridge. "You always did breathe steady," he said, almost like a compliment, before walking away. I stayed a few more minutes, letting the air cool on my face. The city noise was a faint hum in the distance. The space he left behind wasn't empty. It was marked, like a page with a single line underlined. 3 days later, a plain white envelope appeared in my apartment mailbox. No return address, no postmark, the kind you slip into a slot by hand. The paper was heavier than standard, smooth under my thumb. Inside was a single card, blank except for the words printed in neat black font. Oracle. This isn't over. No signature, no emblem, no flourish. Just the weight of those 4 words, deliberate in their spacing. I read it twice, then once more, not for the content, but for the cadence. The threat wasn't in the statement. It was in the certainty of whoever sent it that I would understand exactly what they meant. I set the card on my desk, next to the small notebook where I'd logged every movement of the Origin investigation. The edges aligned perfectly, as if it had been cut to match. Then I did what I've always done. I breathed in for 4, out for 4. Let my pulse settle to the familiar rhythm. The game wasn't over, that much was clear, but neither was I. I slid the card into an evidence sleeve, labeled it, and locked it away. Some people think calm is the absence of fear. It isn't. Calm is preparation, knowing the storm will come again, and choosing to stand ready when it does. When I finally turned off the desk lamp, the apartment was dark, but my mind was not. Somewhere out there, the network was still moving, and I would be here, steady, waiting for the next move, because Oracle never sleeps. I don't need applause. I don't need my name in a headline or my story packaged for public consumption. What I need, what I've always needed, is to keep my principles intact. To know that when the moment came, I stood where I was supposed to stand, even if no one else was watching. Some people measure their worth in recognition. I measure mine in the quiet moments after the choice is made, when the air feels steady again and I can breathe without wondering if I compromise to make it easier. It's not about winning every battle. It's about walking away without owing the wrong people anything. That night in Paris, on the balcony in North Africa, even here in my apartment with a threat sealed in a white envelope, it has never been the noise that defined the work. It's been the silence after, the knowledge that my actions might never be publicly known, but will ripple through lives I'll never meet. I am not unshakable. Fear visits, doubt visits, but they don't stay long. Because long before I became Oracle, I learned that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep moving in spite of it. And when the weight comes, you carry it with both hands and without letting it bend your spine. The world will keep twisting itself into shapes meant to confuse and distract. My role is simple. Hold steady, keep breathing, and act when the opening comes. That's enough. It always has been. When I was a child, my father told me something that I thought I understood. Information is life. Back then, I thought it meant knowing things other people didn't, facts, figures, secrets that could open doors. But now I understand it differently. Information is life because it tells you when to step forward and when to hold your ground. It tells you which battles matter and which are traps. It tells you who to trust and when trust has become a liability. But information alone isn't enough. What you do with it, how you carry it, that's where the real strength lives. I've learned you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to dominate a room to make a difference in it. Quiet action, precise and well-timed, can turn the course of events more effectively than the loudest voice in the crowd. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe someone has told you you're just something, a title, a role, a version of yourself they decided on long before you had the chance to show them otherwise. Let them. You don't owe them proof on their timeline. What matters is that when the moment arrives, you're ready, not to prove them wrong, but to do the right thing. That's the kind of victory that doesn't fade when the applause stops, and you'll carry it with you long after the crowd has moved on. Strength can be quiet, resolve can be calm, and sometimes the loudest statement you can make is the one you deliver in a single deliberate sentence, when the whole room is listening and you know exactly why. I left my apartment just as the sun began to rise, the early light catching on the ripples of the Potomac. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes every sense without the sting of winter. I walked toward the riverbank, feeling the weight of my coat settle evenly across my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, the network I'd helped fracture was already adjusting, shifting pieces, looking for new openings. Somewhere, the person who slipped that envelope into my mailbox believed their message would unsettle me. It didn't. It reminded me that the work isn't over, and that I'm exactly where I need to be to meet it. Because Oracle never sleeps. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.